Officer Daniel Reeves and his partner, Officer Lisa Carter, were called to a quiet farmhouse on the outskirts of town. But by the time backup arrived, only one would make it out alive. It was a night that began like so many others in the quiet town tucked away between rolling fields and dense woods. The streets had fallen silent hours earlier, leaving only the occasional hum of a passing car and the distant call of crickets. Officer Daniel Reeves sat in his cruiser, parked near the edge of town, watching the dashboard clock tick past 11:30 p.m. For over a decade, he had worked nights, patrolling familiar roads and answering the same types of calls. Nothing about this shift seemed unusual. But the quiet did not last. At 11:47, the dispatch channel crackled to life with a report that broke the stillness. A local caller had reported strange activity near the abandoned farmhouse on Ridley Road. The property had been empty for years, its decaying frame standing like a scar against the tree line. Teenagers sometimes dared each other to sneak inside, but tonight the caller described something different. Lights flickering in the windows and figures moving in the yard. Reeves gripped the steering wheel and listened carefully. He had been to that farmhouse before. Each time it turned out to be nothing but trespassers or squatters looking for a place to sleep. He gave a calm acknowledgement over the radio and pulled the cruiser onto the road. The drive out to the farmhouse was short, less than 10 minutes, but with every mile the town lights faded behind him. The night grew darker, the trees on either side of the road twisting together overhead like skeletal arms. He slowed when the old mailbox came into view, its paint peeling, its numbers faded with age. Beyond it stretched the dirt drive that led to the property. Reeves switched off his headlights and let the cruiser roll forward quietly, the gravel crunching under the tires. The farmhouse emerged in the distance, a crooked silhouette against the starless sky. Its roof sagged inward, and the shutters hung loose on rusted hinges. Even from a distance, Reeves noticed the front door swaying, pushed gently by the night wind. His instincts told him to approach with caution. He parked the cruiser a short way down the drive, leaving the engine off, and stepped out into the damp air. The smell of earth and mold was strong, carried from the fields. He adjusted his vest, checked his flashlight, and began walking toward the structure. The ground was uneven and scattered with weeds that reached his knees. Each step seemed to echo in the emptiness, though no sound should have traveled so far. When he reached the porch, he paused, shining his flashlight across the faded boards. The beam caught on shards of glass and an old rocking chair lying on its side. He stepped forward, the boards groaning under his weight. The open door revealed nothing but darkness inside, thick and heavy as if the house itself were holding its breath. Reeves took a long breath, his pulse steady but alert. He raised his flashlight, placed one hand on the holster at his side, and crossed the threshold. At that moment, though he could not have known, he was walking into a night from which he would never return. Inside, the air was stale and suffocating, as though it had been sealed off for years. The beam of Reeves' flashlight cut across peeling wallpaper and broken furniture left to rot in silence. The floor beneath his boots was littered with fragments of glass, empty bottles, and discarded wrappers, signs that others had been there before him. Yet there was something about the scene that unsettled him. It didn't look abandoned in the way he expected. The bottles were recent brands, the wrappers not yet faded. Whoever had been inside this place had been here not long ago. Reeves moved slowly, sweeping the light across the entryway, his radio crackling faintly at his shoulder. He pressed the button to check in, but the only sound that came back was static. He stepped farther in, following the beam into what had once been a living room. A torn sofa slumped against the wall, its stuffing spilling onto the floor. A fireplace yawned, black and cold, surrounded by ash that looked oddly disturbed. Reeves crouched, running his gloved hand lightly across the debris, noting the pattern of footprints in the dust. Some were small, others larger, but they were fresh, uncoated by the layers of dirt that covered everything else in the house. He straightened, eyes narrowing, and continued forward. The silence was heavy, broken only by the creaks of the house as if it were alive and groaning under the strain of its own age. He followed the hall toward the staircase, each step deliberate and careful. The beam of his flashlight revealed graffiti etched onto the walls, words and symbols that didn't resemble the usual scrawls of bored teenagers. Circles intersected with jagged lines, strange shapes repeated over and over in black marker. Reeves paused, studying them, trying to make sense of the designs, but nothing about them connected to anything he knew. He felt unease tightening in his chest. Whoever had left these markings wasn't just trespassing. They had a purpose. The stairs loomed ahead, narrow and steep, their wooden steps warped with moisture. He pressed his boot onto the first one, testing the weight before shifting upward. Each step groaned in protest as he ascended, the light moving over cracked plaster and more of the strange markings. Halfway up, he thought he heard something. A soft shuffle above, followed by the faintest sound of breathing. He froze, holding his breath to listen more closely. For several seconds there was nothing, only the sound of his own heartbeat, and then a sudden creak of a floorboard upstairs. Reeves moved again, more quickly now, climbing until he reached the landing. The hallway stretched out before him, long and narrow, with several doors leaning loosely from their frames. At the far end, a thin strip of light bled from beneath one door, faint but unmistakable. Reeves angled his flashlight toward it, the beam cutting through layers of dust floating in the air. The smell changed here. It was sharper, metallic, almost like blood mixed with mildew. His grip tightened on the flashlight as he advanced down the hall, boots pressing carefully against the warped boards. Each door he passed revealed more neglect. Empty rooms with broken furniture, a shattered mirror, piles of discarded clothes. But the light at the end of the hall drew him forward, pulling him into its mystery. When he reached the door, he stopped and listened. The faint sound of movement came from within, like someone shifting their weight against the floor. Reeves reached for the handle, his other hand hovering near his holster. The house felt suddenly alive, every creak and groan magnified, the silence between sounds heavy and oppressive. With a steady breath, he turned the handle and pushed the door inward, stepping into the unknown. The room beyond was small, its walls stained with damp patches that spread like veins through the plaster. The first thing Reeves noticed was the drawings. Covering nearly every surface, they were rough, jagged markings done in black and red. Some were symbols, repeating shapes that formed twisted patterns, while others looked like crude faces with hollow eyes. The floor was scattered with papers, each sheet filled with the same disturbing sketches, layered over one another as though the person making them had worked without stopping. In the corner of the room was a mattress, filthy and sunken, its surface covered with stains too dark to be mistaken for anything innocent. Reeves moved closer, his flashlight sweeping across the walls. His beam caught something on the floor near the mattress, an item of clothing. He crouched, lifting it slightly with his gloved hand. It was a jacket, not old or forgotten, but clean, the kind someone would have been wearing recently. That small detail made his pulse quicken. Whoever had been living here was not a relic of the past. They were still around, maybe even close by. The air in the room grew heavier with the thought. He straightened quickly, his senses sharpened, scanning the corners with the beam of his light. The floor creaked behind him, sharp and sudden. He spun on instinct, flashlight aimed at the doorway, but nothing was there. The hall was empty, only shadows stretching long across the floor. He stepped toward the door, sweeping the light back and forth, searching for movement. His chest tightened as the silence pressed in again, thicker than before. He forced himself back into the hall, every muscle taut, the beam of his light bouncing against the cracked walls. As he continued down the hallway, the sense of being watched became impossible to ignore. Each doorway he passed seemed to breathe darkness, as though something hidden waited just out of sight. He stopped at another room, pushing it open with slow care. Inside was an old wardrobe, its doors open wide, revealing only splintered wood and empty space. But scratched deep into the wardrobe's interior were more of those markings, carved rather than drawn, as though done in a frenzy with something sharp. The shapes overlapped, gouged into the wood with desperation or obsession. Reeves ran the light over them, unsettled by how deliberate they looked. A sudden noise jolted him, a door slamming somewhere deeper in the house. The sound echoed through the halls, heavy and final. He raised his radio again, pressing the button hard, but the device gave nothing but static. He muttered under his breath, then pressed forward, moving quicker now, his light shaking as he turned corners and scanned each empty space. His heart pounded in his ears. The noise had come from the direction of the stairs leading down, and instinct drove him there. When he reached the top of the staircase, the smell of mildew mixed with something sharper, metallic and foul, drifting up from below. His flashlight beam stretched downward into the shadows, catching only fragments of the basement door at the bottom. It was ajar, swaying gently, and the dark void beyond it seemed to breathe in rhythm with the house itself. Reeves gripped the railing, forcing his steps slow and deliberate, each creak of the wood beneath him magnified in the silence. As he descended, the oppressive feeling of the farmhouse deepened. Something was waiting below, and with each step he knew he was drawing closer to it. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, a damp chill that seeped through Reeves's uniform and made his skin crawl. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling swung slightly, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The air smelled of earth, mildew, and something sharp, almost metallic. Reeves's flashlight swept over the concrete floor, revealing stains that looked old, yet strangely fresh, dark streaks that ran across cracks and pooled in corners. The beam caught on shapes at the far end of the room, crates stacked haphazardly, sheets draped over furniture, and a small table covered with tools that had clearly been used recently. Near the back wall, Reeves noticed a section of concrete that looked out of place. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a false wall, slightly protruding, with nails sticking out where someone had hurriedly secured it. He pressed on it, and it gave way with a soft groan, revealing a narrow chamber beyond. Inside, the space was small, barely enough for one person to stand comfortably, but it had signs of habitation. A thin mattress lay on the floor, stained and threadbare, and blankets were piled in a corner. On the ground were shackles, crude but functional, their metal dark with age and possibly something more. Small containers and scattered belongings suggested that someone had been living there for weeks, maybe months. As Reeves examined the chamber, a sound above him made him freeze, a soft, dragging noise, deliberate and slow. His pulse spiked as he turned his flashlight toward the stairs. The beam revealed nothing at first, but then a shadow flickered at the top, shifting unnaturally. He reached for his radio, pressing the button repeatedly, but the device remained silent. The crackle of static offered no reassurance. The dragging sound grew louder, descending the stairs. Reeves's instincts screamed at him to retreat, but he was too deep into the house to leave blindly. He scanned the chamber, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon, but all he had was his sidearm. The figure emerged from the darkness, tall and gaunt, with movements deliberate and calculated. Reeves's flashlight caught on a glint of metal in the intruder's hand. Every step the figure took seemed measured, almost ritualistic. Reeves lifted his weapon, but the intruder was fast, closing the distance with alarming speed. The basement felt suddenly smaller, walls pressing in as the shadow moved closer. The air grew heavier, and each step the figure took echoed through the concrete like a drumbeat. Reeves fired once, the shot deafening in the enclosed space, but it barely slowed the figure. The intruder lunged, and a struggle ensued. Fast, violent, and chaotic. Shadows collided under the swinging light, and the sounds of metal scraping against metal and flesh hitting concrete filled the chamber. Reeves fought to maintain control, but the figure seemed to anticipate every move, every dodge, every strike. Within moments, the struggle reached its brutal climax. The basement fell silent again, only the swinging bulb casting shifting shadows over the floor, telling a story of a confrontation too swift and precise for any ordinary encounter. Hours later, when backup finally arrived, the basement revealed the aftermath. Blood streaked the concrete, the floor littered with overturned crates and scattered belongings. Reeves's weapon lay on the ground, empty, but Reeves himself was gone. The false wall remained partially open, a silent witness to what had occurred. Every detail suggested the struggle had been close, personal, and meticulously planned. Those who came after could only piece together fragments, a puzzle with a missing piece. The officer who had walked into the house and never walked out. Weeks passed after Officer Daniel Reeves vanished, but the farmhouse on Ridley Road remained as ominous as the night he disappeared. Local law enforcement returned multiple times, scouring the surrounding woods, abandoned outbuildings, and nearby rivers, yet no trace of him was ever found. The house itself seemed untouched in the days that followed, the windows still dark, the broken shutters swaying in the wind. Investigators noted the bloodstains in the basement, the overturned furniture, and the false wall that hid the small chamber. Every piece told a story of struggle, yet the main figure, the officer, was missing, leaving the case suspended in a void of unanswered questions. Rumors spread quickly through the town. Some claimed to have seen strange figures lurking near the property at night, moving silently between the shadows. Others whispered of the symbols on the walls, insisting they were more than just graffiti, that they were part of some ritual or code no one alive could fully interpret. The stories fueled fear and speculation, and residents began avoiding the area entirely. Even local teenagers who had once dared each other to enter the farmhouse stayed far away, convinced that something dangerous had made its home there. Something that had claimed Reeves and might claim anyone else foolish enough to enter. Inside the house, forensic teams documented every detail. They photographed the symbols, collected samples from the floor, and examined the false wall and its hidden chamber. Yet nothing explained the disappearance. There were no footprints leading outside, no clues that Reeves had escaped on his own, no evidence of anyone else having left the property. His radio, uniform, and sidearm were all accounted for, yet the man himself had vanished. Specialists in criminal behavior reviewed the scene and concluded that the intruder, if that's what it was, must have been calculated, patient, and aware of every move Reeves would make. The idea that a single person could vanish so completely from a scene like this puzzled even the most experienced officers. Months later, the farmhouse remained sealed off, though curiosity drew the occasional trespasser. Those who entered reported feeling watched, hearing footsteps, and sensing movement where there was nothing visible. Some claimed the air inside was different, heavier, almost alive. Investigators who had been inside swore the markings on the walls seemed to shift if you looked too long, and that shadows moved just beyond the reach of their flashlights. The farmhouse became a local legend, a place parents warned their children to avoid, a structure tied forever to the unsolved mystery of Officer Reeves. Even now, years after that night, the disappearance remains unsolved. The town remembers Daniel Reeves on the memorial wall for fallen officers, honoring his service and bravery. Yet behind that recognition lies the unanswered question of what truly happened in the abandoned farmhouse. The house itself stands as a monument to fear and uncertainty, its windows dark, its doors creaking, and the secrets it holds buried deep within its walls. One officer entered that night and never returned, leaving behind a story that haunts the town to this day. Shadows, symbols, and silence remain, a chilling reminder that some nights are too dangerous to survive.